call this regular meeting of the Board of Education to order. The next regular Board of Education meeting will be held on Tuesday, April 23rd at 7:30 p.m. in the Board of Education meeting room. We'll open tonight, actually, just as an update with a question posed by the first selectman, but worthy of updating everybody. She had read an article in the Patch about lead in the drinking water in schools nationally. As the board well knows, it was reported out to us in 2017 that our drinking water was tested. It came back with excellent results. In fact, the health director just complimented us on them the other day and said, you can't get better than that. It is district practice to test every 2 years. And when Dr. Landon and I asked Mike Lynch when the next test would be, he smiled and told us next week. So he is on it. We will have new results to put out to you, but we are happy with our results and certainly happy that we don't fall into that category. Just a quick reminder to the board, I sent out an email a little over a month ago if we'd like to engage on an evening or an agenda item around athletics. I have not received suggestions. I've only received one from one board member. So thank you for that, but please get them to me because the questions will inform the item and or will give the district time to research so that they are prepared to answer our questions. So if that is still something we'd like to engage upon, I do need to hear from board members in order to do so. With that, we will move to public comment. Any public comment this evening? Seeing none. We will move on to the superintendent's report. Dr. Landon.
First, I would like to report, because we've had some questions from the public, the administration will not be making any further capital requests during this fiscal year to the board. Any capital requests that are on that list that we might have considered for different priority will have to be addressed beginning in the fiscal year beginning July 1st. And for the information of the board and the public, on or after May 15th, or beginning with May 15th, all new students to be registered in our schools will have their parents or guardians able to register them online.
Very nice. 21st century school. I still like my paper. Thank you, Dr. Landon. We will move on to the approval of minutes. It is requested that the board approve the following minutes. Minutes of the special meeting and executive session held March 26, 2019. May I have a motion? Mr. Burke. Seconded by Mrs. McNamara. All in favor? Mr. Dean? That is unanimous. And minutes of the regular meeting held on March 26, 2019. May I have a motion? Mrs. Ritchie and Mr. Brown. All in favor? And that is unanimous. Thank you, everybody. We will move on to board committee reports. Mrs. Stein.
A quick update from the Superintendent Search Committee. We are in our final stages and we hope to have something to share with our community on or about April 23rd. So stay tuned.
Thank you. Mr. Dean?
The Oxridge Elementary School Building Committee met on March 29th. We discussed and reviewed proposals for a traffic study. We also looked at proposals for abatement studies that have to be done. The request for architectural and engineering services closed on April 4th. We are looking at those proposals this week to narrow them down. There were over a dozen received. We'll narrow them down to 5 or so to take a look at them and start inviting people in. The next meeting is this Friday, April 12th at 7:30 a.m. in Town Hall. And we also have a meeting this Thursday up in Hartford with the State Construction Authority to talk about the grant process on buildings.
Thank you. Any other board committee reports this evening? Seeing none, we will move on to our presentations and discussions. First up, we are very happy to have a guest with us. Thank you, Mr. Ginsberg, for being here. We'll have a conversation with Jeremy Ginsberg regarding the Planning and Zoning Municipal Use Amendment. Dr. Landon and Mr. Ginsberg.
Yeah, you know, I'm very pleased to have been able, on behalf of the board, to invite Mr. Ginsberg here. He and I have had several interactions since I came here to town, working with him on behalf of the Planning and Zoning Commission. He's been incredibly helpful to us and always willing to join with us in any project that we are interested in doing and helping us get through the difficulties that, may arise.
Great. Well, thank you. The board was asked about the municipal use application, and I think the best place for us to start, since we've been so focused on budgeted schools, if you could explain to us a little bit about what this municipal use application is.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Jeremy Ginsberg, Planning and Zoning Director. You may have heard grapevine or newspapers about the fact the Planning and Zoning Commission currently has an application to rezone certain properties in town to apply a municipal use zone. And this, I'll back up a second, because this is really an outgrowth of the 2016 Town Plan of Conservation and Development. Every 10 years, the Planning and Zoning Commission has to prepare a plan. And they completed that in 2016, and that plan made a number of recommendations on a number of areas of the community. And so the Planning and Zoning Commission then took up the implementation of that plan in a number of areas. For example, one of the areas was new sign regulations. And the Commission just finished adopting those a few months ago, and we're pleased to bring the sign regulations up to this century. The Commission's also focusing on business zoning regulations. Times have changed, businesses have changed, the nature of office parks have changed. So the Planning and Zoning Commission has an application pending to modify the zoning related to commercial districts. And that public hearing will be this Thursday. Similarly, the Commission has been working on a municipal use zoning application. The municipal use zone was established in 2006, really as part of the development of when the library was here, it moved to 1441 Boston Post Road, and really that, at the time, that was all the land the library was able to get. It was unique to find such a big parcel right on the main road, but the current zoning there really didn't give them the flexibility they needed. So they created this municipal use overlay zone, which gave more flexibility in terms of building height. You've all seen the library, it's a little taller than many of the buildings in town, it has 3 full stories. And then the municipal use zone was then applied to the police station when they expanded soon thereafter. Again, they were boxed in, really no additional land for them to expand to. So they took advantage of the municipal use zone. And most recently, in 2016, Old Town Hall Homes, which is over on Academy Street and Boston Post Road, currently being constructed, took advantage of the municipal use zone to get additional building height, a full 3-story, it's going to be a 3-story apartment building. So really this zone would be in addition to the underlying zone. So let's talk about how it might apply to the 7 schools. The Commission has proposed adding it to 13 town properties, including 7 schools, 5 elementary, middle school, high school. This building, 35 Beloit, 3 fire departments, Town Hall at 2 Renshaw Road, and 126 Ledge Road, which is the Public Works building. So when you think about any of the schools, there are all the 7 schools in Darien are in residential zones, different residential zones, different acreage. And they all have underlying zoning requirements in all the residential zones in town. The maximum height is 2.5 stories, 30 feet. And there's different setbacks, front, side, and rear setbacks. And through the years, the town has developed various schools and school additions using those regulations. And where the regulations couldn't be met, they went to the Zoning Board of Appeals for variance. Most recently was Middlesex Middle School for the 3-story rotunda, and Darien High School also for a height variance. So you can see that through time, it's been realized that schools are a little different. When you think of the underlying zoning, the residential zoning, houses are not really similar to schools. The needs of schools are different than the need for houses. Most houses in Darien, not all, most houses do not have gymnasiums or auditoriums. The schools, the high school and Middlesex Middle School have those needs, which are kind of unique, and especially a gymnasium has a need for height, certainly, to make it work. Auditoriums similarly, and the nature of these schools are they're big, and the way building height's calculated, you measure the whole area around the school in terms of finding the grade around the school. So the MU zone would be an additional zoning option available to give more flexibility for development options. So let me talk a little bit about that flexibility, what flexibility would be gained with the municipal use zone. There's really three areas. One is building height, would allow you to go higher than the current 30-foot, 2.5-story maximum. It let you go up to 40 feet and 3 stories, so higher, and finish some space below ground. A slight increase in building coverage in residential zones in Darien. There's now a 20% building coverage maximum, would allow an increase to 25%. And it would allow a reduction in setbacks. Currently, in each residential zone, there's differing setbacks, whether you're in the 2-acre zone, the 1-acre zone, the R1/5. So each zoning district has different setbacks. The MU zone would allow a reduction, if the Planning and Zoning Commission makes certain findings, down to 25 feet, front, side, and rear, or even less, possibly down to 8 feet in certain circumstances, with certain findings being made, again, by the Planning and Zoning Commission. So there would be no change in the underlying zoning, but it really gives another different opportunity, a different option, more flexibility in development. With that option, however, comes the fact that the regulations require higher scrutiny by the Planning and Zoning Commission. And I'll give an example of that. In the underlying zoning, in all residential zones in Darien, schools are allowed what we call as of right, permitted principal use. So to expand a school, the best example is the high school cafeteria was recently expanded. It was a small expansion off the east side of the building. The high school's permitted as of right. The cafeteria expansion met all the setbacks, it met building height, met coverage. It was a simple site plan review by the Planning and Zoning Commission. Didn't even require a public hearing. They might have had one, but I don't recall, but it was very simple. The use of the municipal use zone, if the town were to proceed using that development option, would require a special permit, which is a full review by the Planning and Zoning Commission. The Commission would have to make certain findings relative to the fit of either the addition or the new development, new school, and a public hearing would have to be held. So with that other development option, there's higher scrutiny, there has to be a public hearing, a special permit would need to be granted. So again, there's pros and cons to using each option, and it would vary on a case-by-case basis. As we've worked on this, we realize that there may be a need in the future for some use of the municipal use zone, but some more minor additions and alterations to the schools, depending on which school and where it is located, might not need to take advantage of it. It might be so straightforward, you wouldn't need the additional coverage or the height or the setback flexibility. Let's see if I've left off anything that I really wanted to hit on before taking questions. I think I can go through a whole bunch of examples, but I wanted to kind of leave it as a general conversation now and let you know that the Planning and Zoning's first public hearing on this zoning amendment to apply the municipal use zone, this development option to the 13 properties, will be this Thursday in the Mathers Center Cafe Extension. It's April 11th at 8 p.m. It is my belief that there's going to be a lot of public interest, and the Commission's likely to continue that public hearing probably to May 14th. We'll decide it on Thursday to give the public more time to hear about it, understand it, and comment if needed. Again, it's just another option for these 13 properties. Sometimes it might be taken advantage of, sometimes it might not, but the zoning really does recognize the limited land in town, the needs of the community, the needs of the town to function with fire departments, police departments, a library and a town hall and schools that really have unique needs which are not like a house.
So, thank you, Mr. Ginsberg, and thank you for being here, because the reason we invited Jeremy here is not to debate the merits of the MU application. That is not our authority or our zone. But the Commissioner Sini asked for testimony, and in order to do that, I thought the board needed best to understand it. So I think if we keep our questions to understanding what this means for schools and what this might mean for us, I want to avoid debating whether the application in and of itself is good, because it's not really up to us. And that's not me putting an opinion on it one way or the other, but if testimony is being requested, I think we needed to best understand what we were looking at and whether we wanted to offer testimony on this particular application. So with that kind of lens in mind, are there any questions for Mr. Ginsberg? Mrs. McKenna.
Thank you so much for that thorough review. I really appreciate it, and as well as for the materials you sent us in advance.
Sure.
I just want to make sure that I understand correctly from the perspective of the schools, given our unique needs. It could be that if we pass this municipal, or not we, but this municipal
Commission, right?
Yeah, if you pass this municipal ordinance, then it just means that our planning process is simpler. However, if it were not to pass, does it truly restrict what building options we have?
Well,
Or would we just have to go through a separate, more laborious process?
It's a great question, because as we've seen in the past with, let's talk about the three most recent significant additions would be the high school, the middle school, Tokenique School. The high school and middle school, the designs, the specific proposals put forth did not meet the height regulations, and so they needed a variance from the regulations. State statutes, the way the state statutes are written, variances from the Zoning Board of Appeals are designed to be difficult to get. You need 4 out of 5 votes. The courts have recently ruled that variances shall be granted sparingly, so it even puts more pressure on the zoning boards of appeals to not be handing out variances to everyone. Variances have to be based on hardship, which is inherent in the land. I do remember working with the Zoning Board of Appeals and the high school and talking about the unique situation there, the fact that the high school was on, the way it was built, it was on a sloping property, which affected the calculation of building height. In that case, you may recall, a variance was granted by the Zoning Board of Appeals. It was subsequently appealed by neighbors, and eventually there came to be a resolution of that. Middlesex Middle School, I think it was before the high school, got a height variance. There was no neighbor appeal, so that was subsequently constructed. And Tokenique School did not need a variance. The way they designed it complied with heights and setbacks and building coverage, and they got a simple Planning and Zoning Commission review, and I think they also went to Wetlands and Architecture Review Board. There's certainly a number of other boards and agencies, but so certainly if this doesn't go through, it will depend on what's designed. If what's designed does not meet the current regulations, they would need a variance from the Zoning Board of Appeals and have to prove that there's a hardship inherent in the land that they can't design the school to meet the regulations.
Thank you.
Mr. Maroney.
So in sitting in this chair, I find it difficult to see a disadvantage other than your higher scrutiny for the commission. But does that apply to all changes to the land, or only those which fringe upon beyond the standard setbacks traditionally? So if you were mentioning 25 feet and 30 feet. So if you go, on a coverage of 20%. So if you go to 22%, then you have a problem. But if you're 18, it's just business as usual.
That's correct. We have, for example, if you think of Tokenique School, it's on a fairly big property. Right now, the way it sits is pretty much right up, if you will, against Tokenique Road and Old Farm Road, and then there's plenty of space beyond for future additions and alterations, if you were to think of that. That I would envision that it's on a big enough property that coverage won't come into play, and depending on where you're constructing it, even the 40-foot front yard setbacks probably wouldn't come into play. My guess is Tokenique School, the way it sits on the land and the amount of land, this would not really benefit Tokenique School, is the way I see it. Again, I don't know what may happen in 50 years from now. I just know one thing, I will not be working for the town of Deadwood.
We may not let you go. Mrs. McNamara.
I'm sorry, to follow up on Dennis's question, just to clarify. So in the event the MU application is applied to the 7 schools, if the design meets those sort of parameters, it just goes through, could you talk about that process?
Sure, it would be very similar to if, let's say Tokenique was doing a very small addition, and that addition complied in terms of height, setbacks, coverage.
With the MU?
With the regular zoning.
No, I'm talking about the MU, so we could just.
Right, if the MU, if they comply with current zoning, they don't even need to take
fair enough.
the advantage of the MU. They would just go through the very simple process of planning and zoning, site plan review, and it would keep it as simple as possible. There could be one, what I think Mr. Maroney was referring to, let's say they can meet setbacks but not coverage, or coverage but not height,
Okay.
or they just need a height thing but not the others.
Right.
Then they would invoke the municipal use zone, and the whole request would require a special permit.
So I guess, off of that, recognizing that all the schools are in residential neighborhoods, we try to be good neighbors. And recognizing that we have big buildings with big heights, we try to be good neighbors. And we do want neighbors to have a voice. Does the MU process still allow neighbors to have a voice in the planning and zoning process? I just, I like being a good neighbor in my home. I like being a good neighbor in my school. How do the neighbor voice still get heard if there is a concern?
Right, it's a good question. Certainly, in the current situation, which is site plan review, schools are permitted as of right in residential zones. If you think of Tokenique School or adding on to the cafeteria is a good example, that there was public input and feedback mostly at this end of things.
Yeah.
In a case like the cafeteria expansion got to planning and zoning, they would not necessarily need to have a public hearing because it met all the requirements. With the MU zone, a public hearing would be required. So if it didn't meet, if it was either taking advantage of the extra height, the extra setbacks, or the extra coverage, a public hearing would be required by state statute.
So it might be fair then to say with the MU, invoking the MU actually invites more public participation throughout the process, allowing the public to have a voice on this. I just don't want it to be seen at any point or drum up any fears that the schools can now build up to your back porch.
No, certainly there are certain criteria that need to be met. The commission needs to make very specific findings relative to the MU zone, whereas currently, under the current regulations, it's does the school addition or alteration or new school meet the zoning? That's the standard. Height, setback, check, check, check. By law, the commission has to approve it.
So like Oxbridge is in R2 zoning, and if Hindley is in R1 zoning, they all have to conform to that zoning and or apply for a variance to the zoning.
That's correct.
Okay.
So with the MU zone, there would be additional scrutiny by the commission in terms of standards that need to be met. The commission would have to make certain findings under section 1005 of the regulations that the special permit fits in with the neighborhood, and there's a whole list of specific findings that the Planning and Zoning Commission would need to make based on evidence received at the public hearing.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. McCammon.
Does this have any impact on what we would need to do if we're in the middle of building and we need to have some portables, for example, to keep kids while we're trying to do a build? How does that work?
If you think about building one school while another is under construction, which has happened at, I think, the high school, Tokenique School are the two most recent examples I can think of, and certainly it may happen at Oxbridge. Who knows? So in terms of that, it's when planning and zoning reviews the site plan, they'll look at that. Usually what happens is the building committee reaches out to us as planning staff before then to try to talk about during construction. Certainly there's a desire to keep the construction away from and fenced off from the school children, try to find appropriate places for the contractors and builders to park, to try to minimize traffic, noise, those types of things. And we try to work that out in terms of with the building committee or the architect. I do remember meeting with the architect for the high school numerous times to try to figure out the best way to manage those things.
But this isn't particularly affected by the MU's application, that's just regular planning
That's regular.
on
And I think-
non-foundational buildings.
I think the area that would come in is that extra coverage might come in handy in a case where you're trying to basically operate two schools at once. You have school, say Tokenique School's running, at the same time you're building another school right next to it. And so that building coverage, you can only cover 20% of any property in town, is where that might give you some flexibility to avoid a variance. And it could be that coverage gets so high you still need a variance, but remains to be seen on a case-by-case basis.
Mrs. McNamara?
Does the MU zone apply to the address or the building? I'm thinking in the event for some reason we move a building.
It would apply to the address, in a way, if you think of the Middlesex Middle School property. Right now you have a school there, and then you have where the senior center, or before that Hollow Tree School used to be. Who knows what may end up going there?
Right.
Right. So if it's a municipal use, it could take advantage of this. So if the town were to put, say, let's use an extreme example, a town hall annex there to house the planning and zoning department. New building would go there, maybe the town would take advantage of that. Could be, but, or you were to put another school there. That could or
So
could
if the
take.
school left an address, that overlay would then leave, because it was not a municipal use
Right,
structure.
right. This could only be for, it specifically says here, the municipal use zone can only be used for municipal buildings, structures, and uses, including facilities of the Board of Education, building structures and uses that serve a public purpose, and it goes on to talk about the library, or Post 53, or the 3 privately operated fire departments. So it's pretty specific that if we were to put a house there.
So
no
I think,
ma-
Mrs.
that would take-
McNamara, your question is if we were to open another school, by virtue of it being a school, it would fit under the
Well, and is
MU.
the language written such as?
Yeah.
That's why
Yes.
I'm also thinking of Fitch, kind of in the back of my mind. I know
Yeah.
it's not in a residential zone, but it's still part of our school.
I would
it's a
consider it a
program.
facility of the Board
It's
of
a
Education.
facility of the Board of Education.
Yes, so the answer is yes.
Mrs. Ritchie?
So I'm just trying to get a summary in my mind. So
Sure.
the planning and zoning would like the municipal use overlay zone for the schools because it sounds to me like trying to getting a ZBA variance or approval is becoming increasingly more difficult. So it's giving more flexibility when it comes to development of schools.
True,
Is that correct?
yes.
It also then adds this component of a public hearing, which I think is beneficial, so people don't have to be nervous that we're going to start building these big structures that are going to creep onto property lines. So I think it's improving the process, it's giving us more options when it comes to developing schools, so I see it as a benefit. And I think adding the public hearing component should reassure the public that it's all out there, we're discussing it, and I don't know if the public hearing component with the ZBA is even
Yeah.
part of that process.
Right, the ZBA would have to have a public hearing. Certainly, we have had calls from people about the MU zone. We did notify every property owner within 100 feet of all 13 of these properties, so we've been writing a lot of letters, and we've gotten a lot of phone calls from people, some of whom haven't had the benefit of this conversation tonight, but have concern. I live next to this property. How could it affect me? And certainly, there's been some concern about, will I see a school 8 feet from my property line? And I said, well, the answer is probably not. Each school's laid out differently on, if you think of, imagine in your minds how Hidley sits on its property versus Holmes or Royal, how close those schools are to houses now. Are they likely to get very close to houses in the future? The high school, maybe on that north property line where the gym is close to residential, but the rest of it kind of pulls towards the middle of the property. Middle school's fairly close, I'll call it to the south property line.
even then it's not really super close. And how would you add on to these schools in the future? So I've tried to explain to people, other than Oxbridge, I'm not aware of anything that's really brewing or bubbling here, but certainly as the town grows, there may be a need to add on, and I do not know on which side of which school they might be adding on, which schools in 30, 40, 50 years might need new additions or whatever it might be, and how those will be designed.
Mrs. Ritchie.
So just to follow up on that, but because it's an MU, there will be higher scrutiny by planning and zoning. So I think you're gaining stuff, but there's also more scrutinization. You automatically get a public hearing. So I think there are checks and balances that, and I know people might be a little bit nervous, but I feel like there's checks and balances built in to ensure
So
that
again,
the public has a
I think the
voice.
conversation for us, and I think what you're saying is 100% accurate, but the conversation for us, again, is as a board, now understanding how this affects schools, would we put in testimony to support it? Would we not put in any testimony and allow P&Z to go through this process? Would we put in testimony against it? The commissioner has asked for testimony, and so I think we have to understand as a board, which is where I was checking. I just want to make sure, as a good neighbor, there's a place for the public to come and voice concerns on any project we would bring. I mean, I think we vet our projects through a lengthy progress even before we bring it to P&Z, because we know they expect us to. But in terms of testimony before P&Z, are there any concerns and or arguments for, against, or would you prefer to let P&Z go through this process with no statement from the Board of Education? Mrs. McKenna.
I think that point about coverage is important with the build of Ox Ridge coming. If it gives us some flexibility to make sure that we can run concurrent schools, I think that's a pretty big plus from our perspective as a board.
Can I interrupt you for 1 second? And I'm really sorry. That's a great thought. It made me think of a question. Are you able to make coverage decisions on a case-by-case process? Is that considered spot zoning?
No, really, in a case, it's a good question. As you are all familiar, current residential zoning in Darien in all zones in residential is 20% building coverage maximum. Building coverage includes buildings and decks. It exempts parking lots and at-grade patios and things like that. So if you think of someone's house and their house counts towards coverage, but their driveway does not, their patio does not, their deck does, on and on. There's a whole list. I can
So it's
spend the
20%
whole night with you
everyone.
talking about building
Okay.
coverage.
So you
But-
couldn't necessarily say, okay, on Ox Ridge, we're going to give you, I'm making this up, everybody, don't hold me to this number, 50% coverage, but on Hinley, we're going to hold you to 20.
Right. In a
Okay.
case, and each school right now is at a different number, depending on how much land they have. Of course, some of the school properties are bigger than others. So certainly, as on the smaller school properties, you are more likely to bump up against the 20% building coverage maximum. And if you exceed that right now, you would need to go to the Zoning Board of Appeals for a variance of that regulation. And the variance would be on a case-by-case basis. You would say, here's the design, here's what we need 22 in lieu of 20. And you'd have to get 4 out of 5 ZBA members.
Okay. I'm
With-
sorry, Ms. McKenna, I didn't mean to interrupt your
Can
thought.
I just add one quick thing to here? So you're saying that it would go up to 25%, but to Jill's question of building Ox Ridge while Ox Ridge remains open, that's going to be double. That'll be 40%. So
Well, it's a
at
good
least-
question
So
is-
how do you get a variance in the MU?
Well, one question
one
is.
question.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Can you get a variance for an MU?
One question would be, what is Oxbridge at now? And I understand that the committee's ordered a survey, and we'll know that within a couple weeks, whether they're at 10 now, 15%, whatever the number is.
wouldn't
So
know.
certainly, if you can't meet the regulations, a variance could be warranted, where you say, look, this is the best we could do. The ed specs say we have to build a this, that, and the other, and we need to accommodate this many students. This is what we've come up with. We need a variance. We can't even meet the 25%. So it's possible to ask for a variance of anything in the zoning regulations, even an MU zone request.
Okay, so on testimony, are there Any fors, against, anyone who wants to speak on giving, not giving? Am I giving testimony as chair? Does the Board of Education, I'm sorry, Dennis.
For me as a board member, I see no downside to not supporting this. I think it's for the use of, it's for the benefit of municipal buildings, and I don't see the negative impact other than a higher scrutiny to go for an application. So for me, there's a no loss situation for the 9 of us sitting here.
Mr. Deneen.
I agree with what Dennis said. Mr. Ginsburg's been incredibly generous with his time, and we've met with him around the Oxbridge project. All questions that you have brought up have come up, and I think with the additional scrutiny in the public meeting and the fact that we are and we will be good neighbors, I support it.
Mrs. Stein. Mr. Graham.
I support it.
Mr. Burke.
I concur.
Ms. McCannon.
I support it.
Mrs. Ritchie.
I support it.
Mrs. McNamara.
Yes, absolutely, thank you.
Okay, so testimony will be crafted. I'll craft it as the board chair, but it will work around, we see it as a benefit for the school, and certainly that we wish to make sure that our neighbors always have a voice, and we always wish to be good neighbors. But this is certainly advantageous as we plan for the future.
And you're going to speak or assume in the letter?
It depends. I was planning on speaking, but it seems as if the budget may be voted on Thursday also, and while I love spending time with P&Z, I kind of think I gotta go see how our budget goes.
So certainly a written letter is fine. As I said, I cannot guarantee that the hearing is going to be continued, but I would, due to the public interest, I would be shocked if the commission didn't continue the hearing into May
Okay.
to give everyone more time to understand it. Again, the general public, people who live near not only schools but other properties, town hall, this building, etc. Because it's
Yeah, it's a lot of interest
a
and
lot of
questions.
interest, and that's okay. That's good.
Yep. All right, thank you so much for
Thank
spending
you
your
all.
time with us tonight.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Can I make a motion to amend the agenda, please, and add an item after F? Sorry, going as fast as I can. It'll be a motion, oh, you probably want me to make an official motion. Apologies. To approve an impartial hearing officer for disciplinary matters for the 2018-19 school year as they arise. We can discuss the issue as we come in.
You want it agenda item?
G. We'll put it just at the end. It'll be quick.
Can I have a motion?
Can I have a motion? Mr. Burke, seconded by Mrs. Ritchie. All in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you, everybody. We will move on to B, presentation discussion of the state-required 2023 changes to graduation requirements. Mrs. Dunn and Dr. De Silva.
As an introduction to this presentation, I would like to inform the board that current Board of Ed policy on the subject of high school graduation requirements does not reflect the new criteria required by the state for implementation in 2023.
It's okay.
We will bring a revised policy on this subject to the board for board approval no later than the first meeting in June of this year. As part of that policy modification, we will revise the graduation requirements for students graduating in 2021 and in 2022 to meet the new graduation requirements, so that the graduation requirements reflect mastery on the current state standardized test, which now is the SAT. Our board policy referred to the CAPT. CAPT is no longer the test.
So
for those-
bring revisions for the class of 2021 and 2022.
Correct. Not for the class of 2020,
Okay.
because we wouldn't be able to implement it now. For those students graduating this year in 2020, we will continue to implement the current policy, which provides students with multiple pathways to meet graduation requirements. And with that,
Thank you.
Ms. Dunn.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So we're here to discuss the graduation requirements for our incoming ninth grade, the class of 2023, if you can believe that number. And You know, I think it's, on my way driving here tonight, I was thinking about really what we're talking about is our students and how we prepare these requirements for them, how we serve them in the best interest of the requirements that the state has provided to us. And in many ways, I feel like it's a great opportunity for us to look at the requirements that we have in place now, and there's some exciting opportunities as part of this process. Nope. So 3 items on the agenda. The first, as Dr. Landon was just saying, is we must include an assessment of basic skills through this school day SAT test. We must also think about the credit distribution that the state has required and then how we interpret it, those requirements for Darien High School. And so we have some recommendations for that. And finally, defining a new element of the graduation requirements called the Mastery-Based Diploma Assessment, what that will mean for Darien High School and our students from 2023 and beyond. So beginning with the SAT school day test, we are required to include it. It is up to the Board of Education to set the policy on what the standards, what the criteria will be around that test. And we're also required to consider an alternative course of study for any students who don't meet those criteria as they are set. So in order to open that conversation, I think it's important for us to look at the data from the last 2 years. You've seen this in our state reporting of testing at the end of the school year each year. But the standards set by the SAT, college readiness benchmarks, are a 480 in the English language arts and a 530 in the mathematics. For the last 2 years, over 91% of our students have met that requirement in reading and writing. Over 81% in both years have met that requirement in mathematics. So it's our recommendation that we use this college readiness benchmark to set a standard for graduation. In addition to that, we have to, as we said, consider an alternative. Are there equivalent tasks that we can provide that can assure us and our graduates that they're ready for life beyond DHS? We know that not all students excel in a standardized testing environment. And so we have recommended to you that we would use as a course of study, the English course for our 11th graders, American Literature, and that a passing grade in that course would demonstrate basic skills in reading and writing, and that passing grade in Algebra 2 or college math topics at the high school would do the same for mathematics. And so this is a proposed policy description that would be included in ultimately the board policy around graduation requirements. So we need to take a look now at the credit distribution and the class of 2023. There are 2 pages in your board packet that you might want to refer to that compare those drafts of those 2 sets of standards. So let's start with our current DHS graduation requirements. One thing to take note of here is that the graduation requirements are established in disciplines, English, social studies, mathematics, science, and so forth. I think important to take note of relative to the new standards is that we have a 2-year science requirement. That will be the biology course, and then for 10th graders, either earth science or chemistry. There is no world language requirement at this time. And the total of 22 credits is important when we make a comparison to the new requirements. Taking a look at the requirements set for the class of 2023, a really significant change here is in the way the state is organizing disciplines. And so I have called them domains. Here on this slide, we have humanities, which is really looking at English, history, the arts, STEM, physical education and wellness, and so forth. And so the total requirement here is for 25 credits within these different domains. So how would we interpret that? You know, we just saw a minute ago 9 credits in humanities, 9 credits in STEM. Those are fairly broad categories. So I think it's our responsibility to recommend to you now, how would we meet those expectations within those domains? So it's our recommendation that if we look at the category of humanities, that we really don't change very much about our present practice. We have the 4 credits here in English. We have 3.5 credits listed here in social studies, maintaining the fine and practical art requirement under the humanities domain, and then we would be left with a 0.5 credit elective in the humanities. That will get us to our total of 9 for the state requirement. Here we have a list of courses, subject disciplines, where we could find that 0.5 elective. Many of our students are exploring many of these areas already, and as you'll see in a moment. The STEM requirement with 9 credits, has kind of entertained for us a discussion about, are we really requiring enough in science at the high school? Strictly speaking, we currently have a 2-year lab science requirement. You'll see in a moment that a majority of our students are taking much more than 2 years of science. But given the NGSS state assessment that is given in the 11th grade now, we believe it's time to recommend a 3rd year of science at Darien High School. We maintain the 3 credits in mathematics, and that leaves 3 credits of STEM electives as part of the state requirement. Once again, we have many courses at the high school in many different areas, in the arts and music, in science and math, tech ed, where our students can meet those requirements. So if you round out the rest of the 25 credits, you'll see an additional credit in world language that we do not have now, a credit in physical education and wellness, credit in health and safety, the mastery-based diploma assessment, 1 credit, which I spoke about a moment ago, and we'll talk some more about at the end of the presentation, and then 3 elective credits that can come from any area. And that leaves us with 25 credits, a significant change from the 22 credits that we have now. This slide, I think, is kind of helpful for you to take a look at where the changes occur between the current and the new in the area of humanities, STEM, and so forth. Highlighting for us the change in the STEM area, an additional 4 credits there. Of course, additional to what we're holding as a standard now. And a world language credit that was not something that we held before either. It's important too, I think, for us to recognize that although we have a required set of 22 credits for graduation, our students are carrying a course load of 6 courses per year. So the great majority of our students, as you'll see in a moment, are already meeting a 25 credit or more at Darien High School. So if we were to take, as an example, the class of 2018 and hold these new standards excuse me, to that class, you'll see that 100% of our students would have met the credit requirement in humanities. 67% would have met the 9 credits in STEM. Important, I think, to note that 93% would have had at least 8. So majority of our students are about 1 credit short of the STEM requirement that the state has now put in place. 98% of our students have had a year of world language at the high school, and 96% of them have met the 25 credits. So let's talk about what the impact then is based on these recommendations to the board. So clearly we're going to see a shift, we expect, in the FTE at the high school. We expect to see some slight change if we have 67% of our students meeting the STEM requirement. Then we will have students we expect that will be opting within the STEM category to meet the credits for graduation. As we are recommending adding a year to the science requirement, we would also want to take a close look now at new courses or modifying courses for the junior year science elective so that we're sure that we have the right courses that offer something for all of our students. The last piece is the health and PE question. It looks on paper that we're going from 1 credit to 2 credits. We offer, as many of you know, PE and health dovetailing with our science labs in the schedule. So freshmen and sophomores meet 4 times out of 8 days, and juniors and seniors meet 3 times out of 8 days. Historically, we have always believed that the PE and the health credits that our students earn at the high school are very important, and we've had a 4-year requirement to do that. When we take a look at our PE seat time, we know that we can, if we treat that PE seat time the way that we treat American literature and biology, we can actually adjust the quarter credit that we have traditionally given each year to a half a credit. So in fact, under the 2023 requirements, the seat time that we currently have in PE and health will meet that requirement, and we will be able to assign 2 credits to that seat time. So we'll have a quarter of PE and a quarter of health every year, 9, 10, 11, and 12. There will be a presentation coming up soon, I don't know which date, on the new curriculum that goes with that model. And last but not least, the mastery-based diploma assessment. For me, this is a really exciting opportunity for us to look at the time our students spend in high school and the vision that we have for their future beyond Darien High School. In Public Act number 17-42, there's very little information about, I'm not going to make any comment about that, about the 1 credit mastery-based diploma assessment. My colleagues, principals around the area having discussions about this, were really not quite sure where to go at first with that statement. What does exactly a mastery-based diploma assessment look like? And we received some guidance at the end of January, actually, from CAPS, which is Dr. Landon's group, the Connecticut Association for Public School Superintendents, exactly. And it was really very helpful to us as we started to think about this. In fact, we will have another NEASC accreditation, interestingly enough, in 2023 at the high school. And one of the most important pieces of that process, beginning that process for the next evaluation, is to develop what's known as the portrait of the graduate. You know that we have a core values and belief statement posted around the high schools and is a very important part of the mission of our school. And with that, we have what are known as 21st century learning expectations. These are on their way out when it comes to NEASC accreditation, and the portrait of the graduate is replacing them. An example is here from Forest Lake High School, where really what we've done, or what they're asking us to do, is to create a picture of what a graduate of our high school looks like. What are the competencies we wish for them to have when they leave? I was at a NEASC presentation recently and took something away that I thought was really, really important, which was we should be teaching problem solving, communication, informed thinking, these kinds of competencies, and our disciplines are the means through which we do that. And it really is a shift in thinking about how we prepare someone for the future beyond our doors. I wanted to share with you, because I think it gives you an idea of what we're thinking about in these early stages. Alex Pear was a graduate of Darien High School in 2012, and she captured our 21st century learning expectations in these beautiful graphic designs. And in fact, as I looked at them at this NEASC conference that I was at, I realized that she had given us a vision of the graduate a little bit before her time. And what I love about these is that she captured the essence of what we were saying in a lot of wordiness through the eyes of a student. And so thinking became the world needs ideas. Communicating became have you found your voice. Developing bloom where you are planted. Awareness of multiple perspectives became see the world through different lenses. Living a healthy, balanced life, choose what's good for you, and lend the world a hand. So this is work that is to be done. Looking at the mastery-based diploma assessment, coming up with ways that are student-designed, that are performance-based, that are flexible, that allow students to show us that they have mastered those competencies. The CAPS recommendation is to choose one competency and have a student portray that competency before graduation. And that work would be awarded a credit through this process. So some of the ideas that we have as examples would be the presentation of the art portfolio, a presentation of the authentic science research process. Students are already doing this work. An oral defense of a collection of artifacts demonstrating a mastery of the vision. It's an exciting idea that we would spend a few days, maybe before the internship, defending with the work we've done at Darien High School that we are communicators, that we are collaborators, that we are thinkers. So it's student designed. There could be independent study aspect, digital portfolio. To me, it's a very exciting work ahead of us. And questions? Certainly, I would say Alex Pear's work would have been a really nice mastery-based diploma assessment. I would have given her the credit. Thank you.
Mr. Burke.
First, with regard to these competencies, would you consider the earning of this credit a grading event, or are you just going to demonstrate and sort of you either demonstrate or you don't? Because it seems to me that we are testing and grading and prodding these kids all the time.
Yes.
So would there be consideration of making this a reasonably attainable goal? Because it seems to me the whole curriculum as designed is to build those
To do all those
competencies in
things.
each of those courses. So
Absolutely. So the idea would be that we would use work that we're already doing, right? The faculty has already had that reaction. You know, we don't want to add more to our students that now says, here's the work you do for your mastery-based diploma assessment. If you're an AP Art student, you've collected your portfolio. Now you'll present it and say, here's how I used critical thinking through this portfolio. The science research, the same thing. A collection of artifacts are parts of the work you do, not new work that you must do to meet it. Absolutely. And it would be, in our vision, mastery-based rubric, meet the expectations, not A minus, 92, 91.
Mrs. Stein.
A question on the language. So right now we don't have a language requirement. We're adding it. I know for some children who may have IEPs or other supports, language is something they don't pursue at the high school. How have you thought about that, and are there exceptions so that a kid can still get a diploma without having to take a foreign language?
Yes. You want to take that? Are
Sure.
you sure?
Yeah. Okay. I'll start and Shirley can add on. For those students that perhaps accessing world language would not be appropriate, that would be a decision that could happen within the PPT and possibly within the IEP. We are also looking at alternatives for the future in terms of programming and what may be beneficial to students that's different than a verbal type of language. So those are things that we're considering as well.
I have another question.
Mrs. McNamara.
So just to follow up then, are there exemptions from this process based upon PPTs? Just to clarify Katie's question.
And the PPT can find a student foreign language or modern language or world language exempt, but you really want to provide opportunities for all students, but they can
totally
find
agree.
an
I'm just-
exemption.
Based upon the requirements, is the exemption built into this public
There can
act,
be,
blah, blah? Yeah.
right,
Okay.
PPT can.
Mr. Deneen.
Alan, as you look at the coursework and all that, any impact on the... Thank you, Dennis.
Okay.
Any impact on the senior intern program?
No, I don't believe so. Yep.
Mrs. McCammon.
Can you talk a little bit about what's driving this at the state level and why this is coming down? Do you know?
I can't really. I think that, you know, I do know that there have been iterations of this over, I would say, a 10-year period. And it's always been a looming date. So we haven't overreacted because it's been 5 years out every time it comes across the table. This one seems to be sticking. However, it is pared down dramatically from some of the other versions of this that would have been, I think, more challenging for us to meet in the short term. So, you know, essentially, with the exception of a shift, I think, in choices around electives in science, the majority of our students will not feel a difference. Except for this mastery-based diploma assessment that we, I think, will benefit from in terms of our accreditation as well. So I think it's a good thing.
This all began with a national concern over whether American students were able to compete effectively long-term with their counterparts in other nations across the world. And there was a determination that, you know, in mathematics and science, we're not doing as well as others. There was a need for a world language because we needed our students to be able to function more effectively in the global environment. And it was a broader-based idea to ensure that students throughout the country were receiving really quality educational opportunity. And so Connecticut picked it up in this way. But, you know, I mean, certainly one of the driving forces was look at Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama.
Careful.
Et al. I say, hey, wait a minute.
Louisiana.
We better do something about those people down there. So.
What a wonderful job it does. I'm sorry, Mrs. Ritchie.
I just want, so it sounds like you touched on this a little bit, but do we have adequate course selection for our students, specifically when it comes to STEM? Is there a broad enough amount of curriculum in that particular area to meet the need that we're going to have?
The majority of our students are taking already 4 years of science and 4 years of math, so you have your 8 credits right there. For those students who are not drawn to science, which is very hard for me to understand, but I know they're out there, we need to draw them. And so if we need to take a look, that's one of the things I highlighted there, I think we do have to take a look at our electives, as we do every year, but through this lens, because we may need to create some options for students who might not have previously been excited about the opportunity to study science and who will now have to in order to meet the requirements. So we want to make sure that we have offerings that are exciting and flexible enough to draw them in. We have a course, applications of physics and chemistry, that is sometimes taught in our tech ed department with the hands-on engineering side of chemistry and physics. And we may need to look at that as a lab science, incorporate science teachers in concert perhaps with our tech ed teachers, because the tech ed piece is also going to meet the STEM requirement. So there are opportunities there to make sure that we have met that need.
Mr. Brown.
Thank you very much. Really quickly, in terms of the evaluation process that goes on, either the project itself or defending, do you have any thoughts fleshed out on how that would look? Or really, I'm just trying to get at what the resource time is and how long that's going to take per student. And I guess I'm really trying to wonder, are there going to be increased FTEs with all the time it'll take to do this evaluation?
Right. Well, we haven't totally worked that out, but I would say that there are 2 opportunities in my mind that would not require increased FTE. One is the senior capstone in English, where the question that the whole course is designed around is, what does it mean to be an educated person? And certainly a defense of our vision of the graduate could easily be incorporated as part of that coursework. Secondly, I think as we are ready to send our students off to internship in 2023, we could spend a couple of days with teams of teachers who are now available, because they're no longer teaching senior classes, to sit in committee and watch these oral defenses, and allowing students, if they did not meet the expectations, to take the feedback and come back to us again with that. So I think there are ways to do this in the structure we have.
So as part of that FTE switch with 3 years of science, do you have enough coverage of science teachers? You have increased students now in science classes, which I agree with you is a great thing for some of us. But do you have enough?
That could be a
coverage?
tricky piece, because I don't expect there to be necessarily an increase in FTE as a result of this, because most of our students, I said, are taking 25 credits already. So mathematically, we should be okay with FTE. The tricky part is that art FTE does not become science FTE. So you have an art teacher who you can't say, okay, I need you to go teach biology because I have an extra section there. So that is a little bit tricky, and we may have to watch that as we see enrollments.
Okay. Mr. Brown. Mr. Burke, sorry. Guys, I can't.
A broader question, maybe not so high school centric, but as these requirements change and these new emphasis on STEM and having excitement to take some extra science or math, will that be emphasized at the elementary and the middle school level? I think a lot of students kind of come through and they're geared for what the expectation is in high school, and now there's going to be a change. Is there going to be an addressing of that in the younger grades to maybe have more of an introduction to an earth science or a physics type learning environment, since they'll be doing more of that in the high school?
The good news is a lot of this work has already been done. In fact, I thought I saw Christian Dockham in the audience, who sat here just a few weeks ago with Linda Johnson, and they spoke about the STEM being integrated right at the elementary level in the next generation science standard new units, in addition to that work being done at the middle school. Moreover, as you also know, through the budget season, we have now included STEM, Project Lead the Way, for our students in middle school that we proposed moving ahead with this fall. And so we do have a group of teachers that will be trained and offering that to our students as well.
Thank you.
So in terms of classifying STEM classes, digital photography, right now I believe you can get your fine and practical arts credit with it. Are we really making sure that what we're offering are true STEM classes, that we have, yes, there's a technological component there, but we're making sure it's a true STEM experience?
It's a good question, and I think that there have been some conversations among the principals around these things as well. For the most part, we were all trying to be, in our conversations at least about our recommendations, there are no parameters set by the state in terms of which to put in which category. And one of the things that they set out with this, the new requirements, was that they wanted flexibility for students. They wanted some choice. They wanted them to be able to, define their paths a little bit. And so we chose to make the recommendation to you to use all of these areas where we feel we could defend that there is a significant amount of either technology, math, or science required. And for the most part, we've required 3 years of lab science. We're requiring 3 years of math in our recommendation for your approval, and therefore it's really the elective piece that they would be able to be choosing. So I think they are getting a core math and science background.
Mrs. Ritchie.
I wanted to go back to the whether or not you're going to have, for the mastery-based diploma assessment, are you going to have an advisor that is guiding the students through that process, or is it something completely independent?
Yeah, we haven't gotten to that, but we would. We have talked in initial stages about perhaps advisory, our guidance seminar. But you're right, we're going to have to oversee over the years that students are meeting. We have to set the expectations first before we can follow them, but absolutely they're going to need, we don't want to spring that on them 2 weeks before graduation and say, where's your project, right?
Mr. Maroney.
This is kind of a two-part question, I guess. One is, building on what Mrs. Achman was just suggesting, are there classes that could bridge two different things? Could it be a humanities and a STEM class all at once, like digital or fine arts, digital photography? Could that be a double class where you get half a credit for each? Or is that possible?
I don't know if you could get a half a credit, but you could use it for either.
Okay, so
you
couldn't use it for both. You have to choose one or the other, but you can't.
I think you'd have to choose one or the other. So you'll have a pathway, and you'd have to kind of, just like when you're getting a major in college, you have to line all those things up exactly.
Okay, and then my second question is going back to the switch to science, which I actually like. Do you think that we will have to reduce some classes or cull some classes down because of this? In some classes in fine arts or humanities, because of this shift. If 67% aren't doing it, that means they're taking other classes. So therefore, will there have to be a cull of those classes?
Yeah, I don't know if there would have to be, but there could possibly be based on enrollments. So I think we would run the way that we do now, which is to take the numbers at this time of the year and see where the feet have landed, and then make decisions about what to run. Because we wouldn't want to just take a course out necessarily. We want to see what student choice kind of predicts.
I might just try to address the first part of Mr. Maloney's question. I think the exciting part about this is that we can develop interdisciplinary courses which can meet the requirement in one of two fields. So there's no reason why you and just as an example, we couldn't have an English social studies program which is based on literature of the times and a particular era in history. We could get credit either on the English side or half a credit on English and half side. And I'm sure you could do the same with science and art, or math and art, or math and music. There's so many areas which is so exciting and ripe for interdisciplinary studies. It could be great.
Mrs. McCammon.
Not my question, but I love the idea of interdisciplinary. My question is, we have a lot of different ways that a lot of different models we use to serve the needs of children with disabilities, whether it's co-taught or lab classes, and that's, I think, a fairly sophisticated planning exercise. Are we anticipating any difficulties around FTE or planning given this change?
No, I don't think so, and I would say that based on the fact that we're running a school with students who are already in I think 96% of the cases taking 25 credits. So.
Okay.
Can we talk PE health for a minute?
Sure.
Just to make sure I understand it. Is it PE or health?
In the future?
In the future.
Yes.
So, I like that
yes.
answer. So, if it's PE or health, I heard you say that what we think we have enough seat time to go up to the half a credit. Would we look at maybe reducing our PE and increasing our health? We have a lot of very active children, but I do think oftentimes from what we hear reported, issues around health could require some more
I think you're going to see that in the next presentation, but there will be an even time in the new model for PE and health each year. So that we're kind of previewing that presentation a little bit, but we expect to have a quarter of health and a quarter of PE per year.
So students will, different than in years past, ninth graders will be with ninth graders only for health, 45 days. Ninth grade, 45 days. 10th grade, 45 days. 11th grade, 45 days. 12th grade, with their own grade level, given the topics and the sensitivity of the development of the students. So it is different, but it is split. The plan is to split it evenly.
Okay, great. We look forward to that. Any other? I'm sorry, Mr. Burke.
Just to follow up on the PE point, is there an ability to allow credit or a waiver of gym participation for JV or varsity athletes in sports?
No.
That's against the law or just against our policy?
It's against the state requirement,
Okay.
yes.
We want active kids. We got it. Mr. Maroney.
Another question is do we, how often do we survey our graduating students to feel that is the high school meeting their requirements for future endeavors?
Not very often.
'Cause
But
I've
it's
heard-
something that I know that Megan is, I think she's here, Emmanuelson, working on. There she is behind me. The support team came in tow today, which is very nice of them. But so yes, we're taking a look at. It's not easy to get them after they've graduated. I think that's been really the historical problem. But it is what we're interested in. How many students are leaving schools after the first year, why they're leaving schools, lots of different questions, but also what field they've chosen and why.
I mean, I think it would be very interesting because I've heard a lot of parents talking about kids leaving school after the first semester last year. And for me, I think it's something, and even if we get back some of the responses, it's something how we can form our education and understand, are we not delivering something, or is just the experience too big for the kids, and then do we tailor a program to fit that as well? But as well, I think the other part for me, also why I'm asking, is I think it would behoove us to send a survey out now before these changes go into effect to see what effect the changes have on the satisfaction rate of those students.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Any other board questions? Thank you, Dr. De Silva and Mrs. Dunn. I know this has been a long process, many
Thank you
years
very much.
in the making. And it seems to dovetail right into the next presentation, a presentation on Capstone Project and the digital portfolio at Middlesex School. I saw the smiles, ladies, between the presentations.
Shelley, if you use that mouse to exit, put the mouse there.
I have a mouse here. Here's my mouse. Go.
There's ways to do that.
Who has a mouse? So Shelley is here tonight with her Capstone Committee and Digital Portfolio Committee. With her is Amy LaRoe, Kristen Colonies. We have Kathy Ansis and Kristen Scully. We're excited to share the work that's been happening. Here it is. I thought I put it in the trash there for a second.
Thank you.
We're excited to share the work at Capstone and Digital Portfolio. From my point of view, I can see the hard work that teachers are a part of each and every day, because we get to see all the emails flooding into central office, in addition to being able to see some of the evidence that students have been working on throughout the year. So I know that I share the enthusiasm of Shelley and her teachers, and I'm glad to be able to be a part of this tonight. And so I'm going to give this over, I think, to Garen. Do you want to click?
So again, thank you for the opportunity to present this very exciting and cutting-edge work that apparently is going to lay the framework for the changes that will confront our high school students. So what we will speak towards tonight. First, we'll go over the digital portfolio, what it is, why we have it, and how it is being implemented, and then that will segue nicely into the capstone. So I wanted students to be able to understand that learning is a process, not a grade. I wanted them to have a vehicle by which they could track their learning, looking at how something began, what their thinking was as they initiated a project in any discipline, and then how it ended. How did they change their thinking? How did they implement feedback from their teachers, from their peers, in creating a product that really demonstrated to them that they could reflect upon their growth as learners? And thus was born the idea of the digital portfolio, that not only would they be able to reflect on their work, but also share with parents their growth as learners. To me, it's more than just a grade, and if students at the middle school level can understand this about learning, then perhaps they will embrace it throughout their lives. So I had this idea, but then I turned to my very hardworking and brilliant teachers to help me to implement that and see how it would actually look. So I will turn it over to them.
So
You need the mic.
Yeah, so the digital portfolio, we're a couple years into it now, and we've learned a lot from one year to the next. When I started in Darien a very long time ago, I remember we would send home the literacy folders, and parents would give feedback, they would return them. And then as things got more and more technical and technology got involved, it was really hard to send things home. Well, that was only submitted digitally, this was in paper. So the folder stopped, and when we started the digital portfolio, I remember one of the kids looking at me and saying, well, why are we doing this? And I said, well, because you can't take your Chromebook to the fridge, right? It just doesn't work. So they kind of looked at me, oh, okay, I get it. And that's really, if you think about it, the big idea behind this is this amazing depository, not just for literacy folders and literacy work, but all the work the kids do across all of their subjects. They put in stuff, whether it's for PE or art, there's evidence across all of them. And it's student created, so the student kind of will create some goals for themselves. They do that through guidance. Guidance comes into our classes, they take over. Students develop that work in the digital portfolio. They showcase work, they have choice over work. There's also teacher-directed work that we'll go into a little more in the slideshow. And then the other required component is reflections, to really get them to understand, why did you choose that? If a teacher chose it, how do you think you did on it? How does it show your growth in that particular class? Karen? So why digital portfolio? Like I said, it replaces those literacy folders, but it also helps the kids understand their learning process. I had a chance to talk to a couple 7th graders to prepare for tonight. How was it setting it up this year? How was it looking back at your work from last year? And they were really excited about it. They're like, already we looked back and we saw we could do this, and now we can do this. So they're already seeing it in 1 year, this ability to look back. For parents, I just think it's amazing. You guys have a chance to really see more of your kids' work. But the biggest benefactors may be possibly the teachers, especially if this is something that's going to transition into the high school. There's an incredible, I have this vision of this high school senior looking back at their work in 6th grade. That's kind of, this grand vision that I see, and wow, look what I did in 6th grade, and look at how I've grown and what I've grown and how my passions have changed and how I've changed as a person over time. So I think that's really good too. So the portfolio work, you know I've heard questions about when does work occur, things like that as well. Most of our portfolio work occurs either in the flex period or during class time, when we might say, okay, I've returned this particular assignment, this is going to be your portfolio component for social studies, and here's the reflection, and they'll upload it. Students obviously can work on their own time in it. There's nothing that says they can't. Some kids like to put a ton in there. We're trying to get them to balance that. You don't want to overdo it. The only time that would actually ask them probably to do something outside of class is to upload a chosen piece, which they do in about under a minute, most of them. So they're pretty quick with that. We can go to the next slide. So where's it found? It's found on their drive. It's just another element of the Google Drive. The key part of this slide, I think, is that, and we make this part of our digital boot camp day, which is something else that we've instituted at the middle school, which has paid off tremendously because the kids are so much more prepared when they then start the school year. So we make sure that they set it up and they have to check off that they did it this way. And what that does is allow you to get into the digital portfolio, but some items might still need to be shared. So if I send out a document to your child right now, I'm shared on it and your child. If you'd want to see it, it would show up on the portfolio, but say you need permission, you just ask for permission. The privacy settings, we just went by what we were told was the best privacy setting for the student. You can't set it to anyone at Darien PS or else you couldn't be collaborators, right? So we were just told to, this particular thing keeps their sites from being displayed but allows access to the targeted groups. So this is just important to note that when we talk about a digital portfolio, we're not just talking about digital work. As I mentioned earlier, kids have uploaded videos of themselves shooting hoops in the gym, the Wii video component of Capstone, and you'll see how Capstone plays into the digital portfolio. So a lot of different ways that they can show their work. This is an early project in 6th grade where they practice some of the new geography terms and apply them to a fictional country. So the Capstone work is something that's come up. Sorry. Did I go over stuff? I'm sorry. Okay. I think this is important too, that we get to review the portfolio work. It stays on Google Drive and goes to the next grade level, and that is part of the boot camp. And all of this folded into so nicely this year our Capstone project, which we're really proud of.
Last year, we piloted a portfolio day with the 6th grade. So it was a student-driven conference. Certainly, we spent a bit of time on preparing students on how to share work with their parents, what to share, et cetera. And we students set appointments with their parents, and they met in the media center, child and one or two parents. And it was time really dedicated for a student to explain basically who they were as learners and how they had grown, and there was a lot of excitement. They had the undivided attention with no other devices of their parents, and it was a very valuable experience, so much so that we've expanded it to include all 3 grades. We broke it down into different teams doing it at different times, and we used the media center because it just really lent itself to the whole project. And we had a lot of positive feedback from parents, from students, and from teachers. We made sure that if a student didn't have someone to come in and work with them, I was there, someone was there. So, and the really nice thing is that parents said, oh, come over, look at this, and then let me see some of your work as well. So it was a really wonderful feeling throughout the 6th grade, and I think that we will find the same thing this year, 6th grade. So every year, the kids set up their portfolio. Amy referenced the Digital Boot Camp. That's part of our orientation week, where students are taught and teach us some of the ins and outs of the Chromebook, and this is set up for them to access. We decided to go with the Google platform because it seemed the easiest rather than using some kind of outside program for a portfolio.
So do you want to pause here and take any questions
I
on
think
digital
I think that's a good
portfolio
idea.
before we move to Capstone? Are there any questions on the digital portfolio? I just have one. You said the biggest benefactor of the project is teachers. That concerns me a little bit.
I'm biased. No, as a teacher, I think as a 6th grade teacher, I'm jealous because I would love to be able to see 5th grade work. Like, that is my dream, to be able to get a better idea. Right now we do have folders that come up, but we have to go find them, pull the work out. We're not getting a full picture. I just think it's amazing that these 7th grade teachers immediately have this wealth of understanding of their students as a student. So, you know, when I say it, I'm saying it through a biased lens that I think it's amazing, because this is what teachers want. You know, we want to be able to look at a snapshot of a kid.
So from that 6th to 7th grade year, can you talk a little bit about the benefits to students? Because I think that's really where we want to focus students.
I
Certainly
think
I completely understand that there is a benefit to teachers.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I recently worked with students in compiling a reflection on a benchmark that they completed, and it's something that they're uploading to their digital portfolio in their English classes. And they took their benchmark that they wrote in October and their benchmark that they wrote last week, and I couldn't stifle the conversation in the room, because it was like, oh my gosh, I used to write like that? I didn't even make sense. That was a sentence? Where's my punctuation, right? The self kind of awareness, the metacognition that was going on was remarkable, and then that was followed up with a series of questions of, you know, what were your struggles here? What skills did you learn that you could use in other disciplines, that you can use in other assignments beyond just this type of writing? We're starting to encourage them to really do that type of reflection, and I think that they're experiencing it. It's very real for them, and to me, I'm sorry to interrupt, that was a huge benefit just to see in my class.
No, that's great to hear.
I'm almost surprised that we didn't do a slide on the presentation day, because if to really answer your question, come to the presentation day. 'Cause
I have, it's great. I've been there, it's fantastic.
I think that answers, like, what I was almost crying that day. What I saw was a culmination of a year of a lot of extremely hard work, and the faces of the kids sharing with their parents, for me, validated everything that we did about it.
Great. Mrs. McNamara?
I'm sorry, could you just clarify how all the information sort of gets into it? Literacy, obviously, that seems very straightforward, your prompts are, but the science labs, how, and just talk briefly about how does it get in?
Yeah.
All child-centered or chosen, teacher-directed, etc.
So what we did in the academics, most academics, to answer that last question, is one teacher-directed piece, one student-chosen piece. So that's part of it.
Per class?
I think, yeah, per class. And then the other part of it, I'm sorry, your first question again.
Just how does it all?
Oh, Google Drive. So even if they take a picture, they will then save that picture to their Drive and upload it through Drive. You can add links. You can, when you go to the Google site, it's very user-friendly. You can add PDFs. You can add upload from your computer, upload from your Drive.
Okay, and they could add anything they want.
If I could just jump in.
Yeah.
Because I'm a 7th grade teacher, we're actually just talking about it. It allows for different modalities. So with the video, they can actually, record their reflection or a presentation, and it really does lend itself. And it's just a housing place where you have lane you can go to.
They get quite adept at it also, and really excited to add a video, add this, add that, take a picture, especially like with a piece of art.
Yes, very. Mr. Brown?
And do we know who owns this content?
I knew it was coming, I knew it.
Given that it's on our Darien Public Schools server, we own the content, at least for now, but we'll have to come back to those 2 questions from last week and this week.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, I didn't mean to laugh at you. I know you're good for that question. Are we ready to move on to Capstone?
So just as our digital portfolio began as a small pilot that has kind of grown exponentially and is a part of the fabric of our school, that has become expanded into a capstone project that focuses on personalized inquiry and helping a student to make meaningful connections. The thinking here was, how can we best work with our students so that they become critical thinkers, so that not only are they memorizing things and learning content, but so they can apply this content to solving bigger problems, which is a big task. 6th graders are little kids, so how can we jump in and look at them developmentally and see how in what appropriate way can we have them think deeply about something that they care about, to have a voice? You've heard me say over and over that our middle school students don't have choice. Well, we want them to start thinking in the sixth grade about, maybe I'm interested in this, maybe I'm interested in that. And there's a lot of guidance. It's not just pick a topic. There's a huge amount of guidance that goes along with this, and hopefully some of that guidance is pulled back as they get older. So to me, the most important concepts of a capstone project is how a student can take a topic, look at it through a sixth grade lens, think critically about it, and then develop that topic for 3 years. So I kind of threw that out to my staff when we came upon the topic of change. Not only our middle school students are changing, but the whole world is changing all the time. And how, in what way, and at this very early level, can students look at change, understand it, and help to impact change in a meaningful way? So that was the birth of the idea of Capstone. And basically what it is doing is developing the skills that students need based upon the instruction they currently receive. It's not a curriculum. It's just fine-tuning skills in presentation, communication, and research so that they can consider a topic and think through it thoroughly. And I'm going to let So these folks jumped on this, and that's what happened with each of the things we've introduced. We start small, and then as it becomes something that teachers can wrap their minds around, the committee grows, and it sort of becomes part of the school. Because this is still in its infancy and such a pilot, we're constantly tweaking, changing, rethinking, getting input from teachers and students and so on. This year we decided to implement the project in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, realizing that the 8th graders didn't have the background. We weren't getting as much bang for our buck because they were new to it, but that really this year 6th graders will have gone through the entire capstone process, which my colleagues will describe to you.
So, big question, why capstone? And I think I can speak for my colleagues and for myself. Middle school is a great place, and one of the reasons why we chose to work with this specific age range is because of all the cool stuff that happens with our middle schoolers. One thing that's really interesting to see is their intellectual development. There's literally an awakening that seems to happen with them as they move from being a bit concrete in their thinking, a bit literal in their thinking, to a bit more abstract. They start to become curious about things. They start to wonder about certain ideas. They start to have an awareness that they actually can have their own opinions, and that maybe some of those opinions are different from people around them, and that's okay. So our idea for Capstone is that it's a safe place for kids to explore those ideas, to wonder, to research, to chase an idea down that rabbit hole and see what new ideas they find, to see what new questions they come across, and to take on some of that independence and responsibility. Another reason why we thought the Capstone Project was particularly important is so frequently we're hearing kids say, will this go into Aspen? How will it affect my grade, right? Does it count towards my average? And it kind of hurts our hearts a little bit where they miss out on the learning for learning's sake. And so Capstone, again, really pushes them to take an opportunity to nurture that curiosity and to nurture that wonder, and also to help them develop some of those viewpoints and start having a voice to express some of those viewpoints. So across the 3 grades, we're really thinking about where the kids are developmentally. And if you've ever met a middle schooler, especially a 6th grader, they tend to be all about themselves, right? They like to be in kind of their own world in a lot of ways. And so we wanted to meet them there, and we wanted them to think about what is going on in your world, your specific world, your school, things that you interact with every day, whether it's in the cafeteria or walking to school on the bus. What is impacting you? And we asked those kids to start exploring those issues specifically there, looking to give them a way to have a voice to express their ideas. And then as they move through 7th and 8th grade, we hope to guide them and also challenge them to broaden their scope and their thinking, taking that same issue and looking at it on the state level and then on the global level. That's
So assuming that you've had a chance to look this over, I hope you have, all of us, I think, have taught all 3 grades, right? And it's really was a challenge to come up with a way to make this meaningful in all 3 grades with their tasks and their skills and a culminating activity. But I think we've successfully hit on what is appropriate for their growth and development in all 3 grades and all 3 categories, both academically, but also in terms of the student's social, emotional, and development. When a kid is engaged and passionate about a topic, they're going to be more likely to commit to seeing it through for all 3 years. It's a big ask. In all 3 grades, I hope you're seeing that kids will be researching, learning appropriate ways to research, safe ways to research, effective ways to research, different kind of presenting skills in all different ways possible, and thinking very deeply and critically, asking questions that they might have been maybe a little afraid to ask as a new 6th grader, but by the time they get to 8th grade, they're asking really good questions and thinking about it. And this is all through all of the disciplines. And when talking about a multidisciplinary approach, this just lends itself so beautifully in every area. In all of our classes and all of our disciplines, we are asking students to make claims, develop claims, and then come up with evidence, researched evidence, to support the claim that they're making. And so everything we're doing in Capstone will support what we're doing in the classroom in that way too. So this is just to focus on the skills for a second. If you want to go to the next slide. In all 3 grades, students will be thinking critically. They'll be setting goals for themselves with a lot of support and guidance. They'll be using inquiry to drive that research that they're doing, and they'll be communicating their findings through presentations in all different ways throughout the capstone in all 3 years. And so, we're excited to see that we have an opportunity to help them really pay attention more, to have some perseverance, to really stick with something beyond just getting the assignment done and care about it, show some resilience and some grit.
And that leads to a lot of big ideas and when do we get this done and how do we not make it harder for our kids? And we really came up with using the flex schedule that was already implemented, and there's a special schedule that is going to be 90 minutes, about once a month or 8 times a year. It's a pilot program where there's usually 2 educators in every flex room as it is, so it's smaller group instruction. It's a chance to slow down, and what we're offering is guided activities for the educators during the flex to scaffold, because 6th graders definitely need more, and then we're going to branch out. So we are utilizing the one-to-one that we have, and we are creating, as a committee, guided activities that really help to push students' own self-learning and extended thinking. So we're using the same formula to make them comfortable so that they kind of know what to expect, which would be a teacher intro, and then the student-driven activity, and then actual time for student-driven work. So the idea is that it's not done outside of class. And they're not missing any of their curriculum. They get to apply the curriculum that they're learning. It's not new material. It's just time to sit with it and experience it and slow down and understand new ideas. I mean, they can also bring in, they're inspired by math or science, and their teachers are all different with the flex. It's a multidisciplinary activity. So an example of a lesson, which I hope you got to look through, it is an early lesson in 6th grade. It is highly scaffolded and guided for students. It kind of guides them step by step, but gives them a bit of agency. So they get to decide what they care about, and a lot of times they're not really sure, right? And then the idea would be to commit to it and to sit with it and to have that grit to figure out and ask more questions. So it's an opportunity. It's not. It's an opportunity, like not homework. It's an opportunity to spark conversation with peers and parents, something that you could kind of collaborate on. And clearly, our hope is that many students are inspired enough to push further and on their own and drive to make this change and feel like they have a meaning place.
One of a highlight for me was we got a call last week when the 6th graders were doing a wee video from a parent who said, my child wants me to go around town filming things for their put in the digital portfolio and capstone. Is this a real assignment? And that the child needed the parent, and the parent thus became involved. I'll just give a small example. A student might be concerned with, let's say, litter, plastic bottles being thrown all around, and look into that and determine at that 6th grade level effect on environment, et cetera. And then that topic might grow into what's going on in the world. Are things changing? Are there things not changing? What can we do to help with our environment? Another interesting aside I'll tell you is I was with my granddaughter last night and she said, today my teacher asked me what I was doing to save the world. She's 3.
She's 3.
I said, what are you? What are you doing to save the world? She said, I'm picking up trash, but nobody else knew what to say. They said they pet animals. So she said, I got the candy. So in essence, we never get, or don't often get to the so what with our students. So what? You know how to make a claim. You can do this in your essay. You know how to cite evidence. So what? So what? What are you going to do with that knowledge? Working with these folks is probably the most exciting part of our day, and I try not to dominate a conversation because they are full of wonderful ideas about how to implement this exciting project in our school. I won't say it's the most popular project right now because it's in its infancy, but everything goes through growing pains and small steps. I think that the goal of having students be able to demonstrate their learning about a topic and think critically about solving real-world problems will really put them in a good position to accept the challenge of all of those high school changes, as well as to have that esteem in knowing, I can do this, I can impact change, and this is kind of what it's all about.
I'm sorry. Shelley, I guess as I've seen this and have supported it, it involves children in self-exploration and research, developing research skills, and following through on something that interests them. I was just thinking, Jeremy Ginsburg was here, he was talking about the municipal use agreement. Well, if I were a 6th grader, and I didn't know Jeremy, I would look at the building that's going around, particularly the apartments that are going around in town. I might be fascinated by that and look into what's happening with building around town as a 6th grader. 7th grader, I might be looking at how does this fit into everything else that is being built around town, and maybe even get into talking with town officials about municipal use agreement. And then as an 8th grader, look at what happens at the state level in terms of how does state legislation impact what happens in terms of municipal use, and what is it, 830G provisions and so on and so forth. But to me, I mean, I find that incredibly exciting. It's only for a short period. It's only 8 times a year. They build on their digital portfolios, which they're going to need as they grow older, certainly, in life, in college, in business, whatever they do. To me, I think it's pretty exciting.
I agree, and I asked Susie the same, what would you have picked? Can you remember back to, I don't know what I would pick as a 6th grader to really investigate. Sometimes we compartmentalize learning because we change periods every 42 minutes. Now I do math, now I do language arts, now I do social studies. So I think the capstone is a way for all of those skills. I mean, there's going to be data collection, there's going to be analyzing data, there's going to be writing skills, there's going to be that humongous research piece that actually set me thinking, and I think I've said this to you before. My first month, I went and watched a 6th grade presentation and the kid fainted. Because those skills weren't explicitly taught of how to present, what is required in a presentation. So that's kind of what got me thinking in this direction, and then visiting all the classrooms and trying to determine how can we overlap all of that learning to its natural conclusion where students can demonstrate how to apply all the wonderful things. Our kids work hard, and they're really bright, and that's why we can do this, because we have kids who are bright and parents who are involved in their learning, but learning is more than getting the A.
Great. Board questions, Mr. Burke.
Thank you for the presentation. It's looks terribly exciting. I couldn't help when I looked at the topic selection, 6th grade, MMS, Darien, 7th grade, the state of Connecticut, 8th grade globally. Is there a way to have an emphasis that we're all United States citizens? I mean, change in the United States would seem to be something that would be, applicable and
I think
emphasized somewhere in there.
I think that
or is it inherent in one of
globally
that?
in a global sense, meaning bigger,
Okay.
not necessarily the whole wide world.
All right, thank you.
Mrs. Stein.
Well, you know, I've been sort of hounding you about Capstone and what it is and asking, when's it coming? And I'm so appreciative of the presentation. I feel like I have a handle on it. I think it's phenomenal. I wish my kids had the experience as well as the digital portfolio. And maybe the high school can think about how to carry some of this
I think they are.
forward, and maybe elementary some of it down. Because I think it's really, I do think kids are so focused on Aspen and grades and that, and I love this. I think it's excellent, so thank you.
Mr. Maroney.
Yeah, I would echo Mrs. Stein's comments. I think, to your point, Mrs. Summers, the ability to learn to present your views and in front of your classmates and or teachers is a powerful learning experience and one that will benefit you for the rest of your life. But my question goes back, and the other part I must say is the enthusiasm from the teachers here is contagious, and seeing the smiles is very uplifting to know how much you're valuing this proposal. But my question goes to, if we're asking a 6th grader and then we're saying that their intellectual capacity, their intellectual stimulation changes from a rote learner to an abstract thinker, and they're very, I don't want to say immature in 6th grade to a much more mature student in 8th grade, what happens if their taste changes from their 6th grade project to their midterm of 7th grade?
Too
what
late.
do we do?
No, well, I think that because we're doing this in such a small group setting and they're being mentored through the entire process, that the ability to explain that to the person who's facilitating the instruction would be fine. It's fine. I think that the person facilitating that instruction would ask questions so that the student could explain the change. I used to like this, but now I like that. And I'm sure that will happen, and that we'll deal with it as it comes up. And I started here, but then this happened. So that's growth as well. So I think if one of the goals of the capstone is growth, then certainly we would consider that. We want children to have voices. We want them to be able to express that in a safe place and to get feedback and a response to encourage them in their thinking, not to discourage them, say, you picked your topic, you're stuck. So nothing is written in stone because this is such a growth model.
So can I?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I had a student who came in the day before she recorded her video, and she was looking at plastic straws, and she'd done all this amazing research about, the turtles and the straws and the nose, and it was horrible and compelling. And she comes in and she's like, I'm ruined. Like, what happened? Connecticut made it illegal. You can't use plastic straws anymore. What am I going to talk about? And I'm like, well, you've been successful. Let's see where we can take this, right? So that was one part of it. And we would look at what different angles we could look at with that. Another student talked about sidewalk accessibility in town. And talked about, I'm sending them here next week.
Selectmen's up here.
Send them to the Board of Selectmen.
But going, next year, maybe that won't be as important, but you can look at what are some other offshoots off of that as it gets a little broader in scope. So I think the project lends to a lot of different possibilities.
That's the beauty of it. So Dr. Landon mentioned the different building codes in town, and you could start small, but then you could speak to the broader housing crisis in the United States, and then the broader crisis globally. So it just lends itself.
So speaking off from Mr. Maroney's point a little bit, when the children are in this 90-minute period, there's two parts to my question. One, are they grouped in any sort of commonality which would allow for a cross-team exercise for once in the day.
That's a good point. We haven't done that yet,
Okay.
and that's come up.
Okay.
So, yes.
I'll let you macerate.
So, no, we haven't, but we're thinking more and more, especially so really to answer your question, students at the end of 7th grade sort of commit to an essential question that they'll be working on based upon their research, and that might be the time to do that so that it is a cross-team based on interest, just for more collaboration and conversation around like issues.
Mrs. McNamara, did you see your hand?
Yes, I just had a question. One, I think it's an amazing, absolutely wonderful addition to Middlesex, but the culminating activity, could you explain a little bit more about those three?
Mm-hmm. And again, work in progress, but we'll tell you our current thinking on it.
Yeah.
We can speak to WeVideo. So WeVideo is a platform the students all have on their Chromebook now. It actually is very amazing. Denise Ryan, one of our school librarians, came into all of the 6th grade social studies classes, took a day, trained the students on WeVideo, trained us in the back on WeVideo, and it's just a video making platform. So that is where the kids are doing it for the 6th grade. That's the culminating project, and they do work on that by preparing the speech that they read on that video in their English B classes, and then they overlay. They can put in YouTube clips, they can put in images, they can put in audio, they can put in, and if you have a middle school student, have them show you WeVideo because they have taught me a million things. We're so excited about it that we recently spent some time writing curriculum for social studies, and we want to try incorporating WeVideo into maybe social studies projects. So we're going to pilot that this spring.
6th grade work is primarily informational. All 3 grades focus on informational argument and persuasion, argument and narrative work, and the capstone sessions focus on informational and argument or persuasion. So in 6th grade, it's primarily informational. We're educating the audience about this issue. And then in 7th grade,
in 7th grade, we moved on to presenting the argument. So again, this is a pilot program, and our 6th graders didn't experience the lessons that our 7th graders as 6th graders, but they did a WeVideo as a.
It was part of a unit.
It was part of a unit for change. So that's kind of where we had the idea from that. So for 7th grade, we asked them to revisit the WeVideo, and because of the digital portfolio, it was there for them, and they could revisit their idea, and that speaks to, we said, you know, when you chose this, we weren't looking long term, so, you know, we offered them the opportunity to revisit it, to change their topic. This was 7th grade this year, and, you know, I was not really surprised, but more than half, 75% kept their topic. They were still interested in it, and they had their wealth of information on the portfolio or on the drive even, you know, like they had everything to pick up from. So,
but next year,
they're gonna spend 7th grade researching, so getting more in depth on their topic, and then working to or present to a panel, present like a peer panel, or we're thinking that's where we were talking about faculty,
community members,
or 8th graders.
Okay, so the idea would be sort of just what you're doing, a PowerPoint, or is it
No.
argument?
So in 6th grade, the culminating project is presenting information in a WeVideo. In 7th grade, it's presenting information to a panel of, we were thinking 8th grade to get that connection, presenting your argument and the reason for your research based upon a rubric that they would use to determine if this topic even makes sense. And then in 8th grade, after a considerable amount of field work, creating an action plan, which we're hoping we can put in a little bit of community service in that action plan, service learning in that action plan, and then presenting to a group at large, maybe someone from the district, a teacher from a different grade level, a parent from a different grade level, a student from a different grade level, also based on the rubric.
So in all 3 cases, it's a verbal presentation, which is invaluable for these kids to be learning.
And I think it develops too in terms of the WeVideo. You know, the kids are like, we have to present what you recorded.
Right.
So it
Rewind.
layers and then 7th grade there is a panel, so it's more public, but it may be of your peers. It's a little, it's next level, and then 8th grade, it's, you know, so it increases every year in terms of
presentation skills.
Mrs. Ritchie.
I just wanted to touch on the development as the project moves along. So in the beginning, I'm guessing when they're in 6th grade, they're going to have a lot of help, assistance during that flex period. I did hear, though, the work should be taking place during that flex period. Is that correct? Because then if they're using parents or out, can they go into the drive outside of the flex time and then do extra? Well, I guess the reason I bring this up is just it can become even more of a project, and I just want to make sure it's managed in the right way, because the kids have a lot on their plate, and I want this to be something that's enjoyed by the children and not become a point of stress, because I think if it becomes a lot of work outside of that period, and it depends on the child, but I'm wondering how you're going to be able to rein that in, I guess, so to speak.
We've been aware of that and really cognizant of exactly what you're talking about, which is why we're just doing it once a month with very structured results for that particular period. So the things, if anything, a student has to do outside usually just come from their deep interest in it, and not necessarily you must have this assignment done.
And there's no grade.
But I would
It's a
say
rubric-based.
it's really interesting. We had one of our advisory lessons a month or so back. I partner with a language arts teacher on my team, and she came up to me because we were going to do this advisory lesson. She said, "Just so you know, I told Jamie it was okay. He's going to take notes while they're watching this video because it's his topic for capstone." So I was like, "Oh my God, this is great!" So there's already this crossover. You recognize the advisory topic, and in a minute said, "I could get good information from this. Is it okay if I just take some notes while the other students are watching?" So they're embracing this. They want to put the work in, but I am concerned that if they get so excited, right? So
Well, just
we are
distracting them
aware.
from their core academic courses,
Yeah.
which they do get grades for. So it's
Yeah.
just finding that balance where
Absolutely.
they're getting that benefit out of, which sounds fantastic, but just meeting that balance where they still have their academic requirements that they need to meet, but you don't want them to get sidetracked by the excitement of the capstone.
So,
One way that we,
No, go ahead.
I was
If there's more.
just one way that we have been addressing that for 6th grade is at the end of that 90-minute activity, they upload something that's completed, like as part of their, it's not as open-ended for 6th grade, the way we've been tailoring it, so like they upload to their capstone page on the portfolio a completed, like they walk out of the room,
Done.
they're done, they're not trying to.
So thank you. I think it's exciting. I think the overall goal to look at our children as learners rather than grade makers is really exciting. And thank you for all of the work you've put into it and for such a thorough presentation. We appreciate it. With that, we will move on to the discussion and possible acceptance of the contemplated gift from the Tokenique PTO. I will let you know that I received an email from a Mrs. Madsen today about this with the Tokenique PTO, who I think is here. Mrs. Madsen, sorry, this is how we get these things in the public record. But she did say that Mrs. Michelson has been talking about the need for a new presentation system at Tokenique for a while. The current setup is an old projector, which is wired to a laptop that we have to drag out, and that she believes that we will see the need for this. I will forward this all on to you, but in accordance with our communication, I just wanted to make sure it was read into the record, and I will forward it to you all now. With that, Mrs. Michelson. And Dr. Landon, I'm sorry, but Dr. Landon's saying goodbye, so Mary, you're on.
Good evening, Mary. I just wanted to start off by expressing our gratitude. In particular, Tokenique is a school that all of our staff uses throughout the school year. So all of our full-day staff development is held at Tokenique for the elementary program, in particular because of the parking. Not because of the air conditioning, but because of the parking. Having said that, when we saw this gift come forward, naturally it's a wonderful opportunity for our children. And on the flip side, the adults I know will benefit as well.
So this has really been a need of our school because of all the presentations that we do host at Tokenique. It actually, as we were sitting tonight, gathering some more ideas, it's very similar to your projection system that you have here. So the little picture here doesn't really do it justice. But at this time, we have to bring an old slide, or what is that called? Screen, thank you. And a cart on wheels that's held, and then we have a projector on there. We have to find different connections for all the different people that come to use our projection. So once a month, our Kids Care has a presentation that somebody comes to present to the children. We have a lot of presentations during the school year, so this is definitely something for the children as well as for the district staff and the Tokenique staff. It's a very well-used common room and projection system. And
Board
so we
questions?
requested that.
Mr. Burke?
It's a wonderful gift, and thank you to the generous parents. Is this something that's also available in the other schools? Is this something we should be thinking about for all of the elementary schools?
Henley was the first school to have such a setup.
They may have it and they may not. Does Henley have it?
I think they do.
I thought
think they got a
Henley
big PTO gift some years ago, and put it in. I think we're going to have to, the board's going to have to take a look at that and the administration over the next year as part of a budgetary issue. But it depends upon the needs of the school, and I'm sure we'll be checking that out with the principals to see how essential it might be.
Dr. Landon, you just caused me some questions.
Well, we talked about it, the elementary chairs all be together with the CDSP.
Mary's right. I'm sorry, Mary's right. It's Oxbridge that has it.
So we've been meeting. This is something that we've all been discussing as we do with the CDSP, thinking about projects that would be beneficial, and if it works in one, is it something that we can think about from others? This actually was illuminated or made us think again when we saw the high school request earlier. I think it was earlier this year for the same thing in the cafeteria. So it's great space. We actually do partner with other PTOs. So, for example, in 2 weeks on April 24th, we're hosting a PTO meeting with Oxford. So,
Who has the presentation? Other board questions before mine? Mrs. McNamara.
I just was going to echo Mr. Burke's comments that incredibly generous, I'm sure, and worthwhile gift for Tokenique, but also always concerned, how does this play out in the other elementary schools where their fundraising may not be at the par of other schools, and how does that work? So I appreciate the fact that you're looking into it and whether or not you want to move forward. If you would recommend it, that's great.
Just as an aside, they all do have a mechanism in which to project, just as Mary does. It is not obviously automated and isn't as easy to use, but most certainly they do have the ability. So our children do have access to what Mary will have. It'll just be a little bit more work on the part of adults to get it set up.
So I do have a question. If the projector is being used for district meetings, and why is it not a district initiative? Why is this a gift?
Well, my answer is when we talk to the principals in the beginning of the year and say, what kind of budgetary items are you looking for? If a projection equipment such as this is requested, we would put it in the budget and ask for it. But each principal has their own priorities, and they do meet with their PTOs, and their gifts are used in different ways.
So to be clear, nothing about this projector system is necessary in order to run the district or the education of children.
As Susie said, they have equipment, and they can use it. It's a little bit different, that's all. But it accomplishes the same end.
Okay, anything else? May I have a motion to accept the contemplated gift of the Tokenique PTO? Mrs. McNamara, a second. Mrs. McCammon. All in favor? This one's rough, guys. Any against? Mr. Maroney. With that, the motion passes. I would ask when gifts are brought if we're just very clear on what's a district initiative and what is a true gift. I think that's the consternation that you see at the board level.
And can I just add on that, Tara? When we're seeing a gift from a PTO especially, I think in my mind, I would like it to be something that really impacts children. And I think we're hearing that this particular gift is not necessarily, it's impacting children, but we're also seeing it's also impacting
So
others.
I think to that point, we can't decide what they bring forward,
No, I
but that
understand.
might be for consideration. when
Right,
you
I
vote.
just wanted to add on that.
Yeah. Thank you all for the generosity.
Thank you.
The conversation you see up here has nothing to do with the immense generosity of the parents, and we thank them very much for that.
Thank you.
An update on the kindergarten, elementary, middle school, and high school enrollment for 2019-2020. Dr. De Silva.
Just as we do for the past 4 years that I've been here, around this time of year, we do provide you with an enrollment, which is the rollover enrollment, so the anticipated number of students that we expect to have at each of our schools. Grades really 1 through 12. As you know, the kindergarten enrollment can shift. Per the Board of Education's request, I also included the kindergarten registrations from last school year at about the same time. That's at the bottom or the beginning of the second page. And so I think you'll notice we have some trends moving up and some trends moving down. Could go either way. You just never know with the kindergarten registrations. This is also the time of the year when some parents may make choices for other options, whether they are choosing another high school perhaps, or perhaps even another middle school. So I imagine that these numbers may change slightly in the next month or so.
Are there any questions from the board? Mrs. Ritchie.
Just I'm curious, I don't have the information in front of me, so I don't know what the projection is for the coming school year. Are we getting concerned about any of the numbers trending higher, resulting in another break in a section for the kindergarten, or is that not?
In kindergarten?
Yes. Well,
The number that we're watching the closest is Holmes. But there's others that are fluctuating.
How close are, I guess, we're at 75 now. How close?
So that's still 4 sections. That's the only one that is on the higher end. All the others are fine in terms of what we've budgeted.
Thank you.
Any other board questions? Mrs. McCammon.
Do we have any concerns in the inverse?
The concern, or the one that we would be watching, I think, is Royal. Although it's trending similarly to last year based on the number of sections that we budgeted, that may be possible that we would maintain 3 sections as opposed to 4. Similarly, Tokenique's numbers are on the lower side. Having said that, they tend to have a lot of movement in the summer, unlike some other schools. So I'm not sure that we're concerned at this point, but as you know, we watch them monthly, and the principals themselves start to get anxious around June and July. They watch them really closely then.
It's a big day in July. Mr. Maroney.
Are we, specifically for Holmes, I guess, are we nervous about the physical space of the school?
Not at this point, no.
Okay.
Any other board questions? Thank you, Dr. De Silva, for that update. We will move on to further discussion and action on establishing a 2019 Darien High School graduation date. Dr. Landon.
We continue to believe that June 18th is the big day.
It's about to be.
That's it. So we're recommending June 18th for board approval.
All right, may I have a motion to approve the date of Tuesday, June 18th, 2019 for the graduation date of Darien High School? Mrs. Ritchie so moves. A second. Mr. Maroney, all in favor? That is unanimous. Okay, G. Give me a second, guys. Dr. Landon, do you want to update everyone while I get the form out about our news on our current hearing officer?
Yes. As the board members may remember, each beginning of each year, you appoint a hearing officer to deal with residency issues, transportation issues, and occasionally, unfortunately, student expulsions. Jeffrey Pingpank is the person who we've had here for years, and of course we were very, very pleased, the district was, and I've known Jeffrey over the years, a very, very competent hearing officer. So Jeffrey retired, forever to leave this profession.
We just found out. He's retiring.
Yeah. And so we sought from our own council if they could recommend someone to us who they have had experience with in other districts in terms of just those issues: residency, expulsion, transportation. And highly recommended to us from a competing firm.
I was going to say.
Yeah, Pullman and Comley, Stephen Sedor. I've spoken with him just to get a feel for what his experience has been and where he's worked and what he's done. I was really impressed. I think his reputation is for being fair and being objective, and he calls the shots as he sees them, neither favoring the administration nor the individual who's on the other side of the table.
So there's a
I'd
quick bio
recommend
that we got just as we walked into the meeting. So if there's any discussion on the matter, if that we need to make two motions, one, and I'll make them and you'll hear them. So the first is Mrs. McNamara.
Just may I ask a question? Was the gentleman who retired also from Pullman and Comley?
No, he's still working for Pullman and Comley.
No. Jeffrey Big was not from that law firm.
Yes.
Different law firm.
Oh.
Okay, he was from a different firm.
Oh, yeah, totally different firm,
Okay.
yes.
Yes.
And the reason we're bringing it to you now rather than waiting until July is because we have a pending residency hearing. And we're going to need a hearing officer, presuming that it continues.
So we need to make two motions. We do make these annually, so we will do this now so that we have someone in place, and then when we need to renew, we will. So the first motion is to approve an impartial hearing officer for student disciplinary matters for the 2018-2019 school year as they arise. May I have a motion? Mr. Burke? Mr. Janine, all in favor? I didn't put Mr. Stephen Soder's name in that motion. So is there any objection if we insert Stephen Soder's name? That's okay. We'll appoint him. It's fine.
I don't think we've ever had the name. So.
Okay, so we've hired him.
Just the fact that we have an impartial hearing officer.
The next motion would be to delegate an appointed hearing officer the responsibility for hearing expulsion, expungement requests, and for hearing school accommodation appeals, including transportation appeals as provided by statute. May I have a motion? Mr. Burke, Mr. Maroney, all in favor, and that is unanimous. All right, thank you all. It's a quick matter of business. Personnel items. Mrs. Sion, any PARs? Oh, I love that. None tonight. Any public comment? It's late night for us. No public comment? All right. With that, may I have a motion to adjourn? Mrs. Ritchie and Mrs. McCammon, all in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you, everybody. We are done with this meeting.
1 minute ago.